Dom, first of all, nice to see Frank at Stamford Bridge on Tuesday. Was there any suggestion that he was in Chelsea's plans before he made that appearance?
Well, no, not really, but I suppose we'll find out the ins and outs on that over the course of the next 24, 48 hours. I mean, the very fact that he was in one of the co-owners' boxes and Chelsea were without a recognised first-team manager, and that indeed Bruno had picked his first ever team at any level for the game out on the pitch. I suppose that there is you could easily draw your own conclusions from that. He is available. Frank Lampard. He's a figure that obviously would lance some of the toxicity around Chelsea potentially, particularly amongst match-going supporters. So on that basis, there must have been some logic in pursuing him as an option to the end of the season.
And it has a certain symmetry to it. He took Chelsea to the knockout stages of a Champions League campaign only to see another man come in and take them on to glory. Now he gets a chance to kind of fulfill that legacy.
But the first game after he left, Tuchel's first game was against Wolves, and who Chelsea got this weekend.
No.
It's like a dream sequence. Frank's just woken up, and it's 2 years ago. It's fine.
You have some strange dreams.
What did I miss?
What do you think? Is it a good move, Dom?
Is it a good move? I don't know. I don't think Chelsea. I don't think Frank Lampard's going to inspire Chelsea to beat Real Madrid, because I don't think Chelsea are good enough necessarily to beat Real Madrid. Chelsea are a mid-table team at the moment. I don't think Frank is going to improve that dramatically. I think that some of the challenges that he will have to address at Chelsea are going to be very, very difficult, and they're almost, the situation is exacerbated now compared to when he was last year there. I mean, there were fringe players at Chelsea in his last spell who were complaining at a lack of involvement. Well, he's got an entire squad on the fringes at Chelsea now, given the number of first team players on the books there. But he is more experienced than Bruno Saltor. And let's be honest, I mean, it did feel a bit odd that Graham Potter's coaching staff were going to remain at Chelsea and oversee first team matters, despite the fact that Graham Potter and Billy Reid had been moved on. So I think that there is a logic in Lampard coming in with other Chelsea icons. If Ashley Cole is in the group, other people who have been there before. Joe Edwards would have been there before. Chris Jones will have been there before.
Is JT in there?
JT is at the club in a capacity at the moment. I don't think we'll see him around the first team, but I didn't think Frank Lampard was going to be in charge of the first team this time last week. It's more about the atmosphere. I think that I know this is like kicking a hornet's nest in terms of online and people who are looking from the outside in. But I suspect that the majority of match-going supporters at Chelsea will welcome Frank Lampard back, almost back to the symmetry. I mean, going back to a familiar face, going back to someone they know, someone who knows the club. We had this conversation a few weeks back about how Roy Hodgson going back to Crystal Palace was a retrograde and regressive step. Well, actually, in that moment, in the situation Palace were in, it made sense. I wonder whether this is the same with Chelsea, in as much as there has been so much toxicity. There is, the atmosphere has been pretty dire there. It's been a desperate season for a lot of different reasons, and having a club icon return, even with his limitations as a manager, will at least give the crowd a bit of a rallying point for them. Whether it has the same effect on the players, we'll have to see. But for the crowd, it's important, probably.
Okay, and in the meantime, Chelsea are progressing with their discussions with Luis Enrique and Julian Nagelsmann. Is that correct?
Yeah, I imagine there'll be 5 or 6 candidates that they'll talk to. I mean, those guys would be the favourites at the moment, but that has to be. That is their priority behind the scenes. While Lampard is looking after the first team for the remainder of this season, for the 10 games or whatever it is in the Premier League and the Champions League campaign, they and their co-sporting directors have to come up with a coherent plan for the summer and beyond. The fly on the ointment will be if Frank. Yeah, exactly. Is whether if Frank Lampard does do something absolutely remarkable, then does he suddenly force his way into the reckoning? But.
I mean, that is the narrative dream, right? that Lampard wins the Champions League, and we see what decision Chelsea make there.
Yeah, Chelsea with a man they plucked from the crowd at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah. He used to play midfield. He scored quite a lot of goals, did he?
I'm sure that's happened before, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Chelsea.
What percentage of games has he played in the Premier League?
Dom, you were kind of marshalling a wonderful piece on The Athletic detailing some of the more extraordinary extravagances of recent months at Cobham and within Chelsea. Is the return of Frank even among the top 5 most surprising things of late?
I think it has to be up there, to be fair. I think it has to be. It's, yeah, I mean, look, I've covered Chelsea since 2007 in one way or another, and there have been some fairly extraordinary moments over that period, not least with interim managers winning the Champions League and Europa League, actually. But this does feel a bit up. It is one of the more remarkable twists. The unravelling of Potter's short time at the club was dramatic in its own way, and a lot of that has stemmed from mistakes from the ownership, understandable mistakes possibly for new owners in English football. He didn't do well enough, but he was dealt a pretty difficult hand, I think, to work with, and the stuff about the sheer bloated nature of that playing squad and the number of bodies in the building, from 11, simultaneous 11-a-side games and 9-a-side games on neighbouring pitches, all made up of first team players. I mean, that is staggering and utterly unmanageable for whoever you are. I mean, they could have, I'm sure, Pep Guardiola in there, that, all the best of the best, and I'm not sure that he would have been able to cope with that.
Tom, I just wanted to ask you something. With that bloated squad, how on earth did Chelsea go about selling all these players? Because we're told that clubs in Europe, don't really have any money. So you're then looking at Premier League clubs, really. But Lukaku, they sold for, 100 million euros around, and then he just went out on loan. What sort of fees can they get for most of these players? And if they don't, even with the very clever amortization that Todd Bowley has done on all these contracts, I mean, surely they're going to be in pretty serious trouble. And do they just start letting players go for, really small fees just to get them off the books?
I'm intrigued to see how that works out, because that is my suspicion that I mean, we're hearing that Mason Mount, going into the last year of his contract, would cost us suitors £70 million. Well, that seems wildly unrealistic as far as I can work out. I don't see who would do that. And even if you're selling to a direct rival in the Premier League, a club that's competing for Champions League qualification as well, I struggle to see how they would be willing to pay £70 million for a player with 12 months to run on the deal. In terms of the accountancy, I guess all their youth team graduates are, I mean, that's clear profit on the books, because they didn't pay any fees for those guys. So you may find another wave of talented young players who maybe have been on the fringes at Chelsea and waiting for a chance, many of whom will be rated, having to move on. So you might see Levi Colwill leave, who's done well at Brighton this season. I mean, what happens to Conor Gallagher in the summer? There's Mason Mount in there as well. I mean, Trevor Chalobah, you could argue as well. He's sort of dropped off the scene a bit and was going to play last week against Villa, and then mysteriously wasn't on the team sheet on match day. I mean, it's that kind of player that may have to be moved on, and that will be a painful process. It'll be painful for the supporters to accept as well, that all these young talented academy graduates are being moved on. They're the ones that are leaving, whereas their priority might be to move on some of the higher paid recruits that haven't really hit the ground running.
Well, the immediate issue for Chelsea is the manager. This week, Frank Lampard is their solution. John, you went back to the piece The Athletic wrote 2 years ago when he was actually the problem. What do you draw from that?
Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about how he's going to solve the mood at Chelsea, but the piece that we put out after he left the first time round, before the remontada, there's lots of quotes that are not particularly flattering about his ability of dealing with players. So a quote here from a source that the problem was the manager didn't talk to the players, well, only the ones he liked. I know of players who weren't in the team that didn't hear from him for many months. That's very frustrating for a player because you like to know how you can do things better, what the manager is thinking. It's crazy. And obviously that was with a regular size squad. So now there's even more players to throw into the mix as well. And there was a situation with Marcos Alonso where he left at half-time when he'd been subbed off, and it said what happened with Alonso raised a red flag in terms of Lampard being able to control the dressing room.
Right.
But at least this time he won't have many months in which not to speak to the players. So that could actually help his cause.
He could try and speak to every player and might run out of time. So,
do they need to buy more chairs at Cobham, Dom? Is that one of the issues?
I did wonder that, yeah, possibly.
Players sitting on the floor.
Getting changed on a bench, wasn't it? Or
getting changed on a bench outside the dressing rooms and sitting on the floor in the media suite. I mean, that amazes me because I've been in pretty busy press conferences over the years in that media suite, and I don't remember journalists ever sitting on the floor. They'd stand occasionally if Jose Mourinho was in full swing, but yeah, well, that is a scenario. I mean, that is how ridiculous it's become, and that's not even including the 10 or so first team players that are currently out on loan.
It was a goalless draw with Liverpool the other night, which takes Chelsea's goal scoring this season, remarkable given their squad, to Duncan 29 in 29, which is the lowest they've had at this stage of a campaign since the 1920s. Do you see that improving vastly against Wolves this weekend?
Maybe, because they did actually create some good chances.
Two disallowed goals, of course.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, we've talked about how this season's endless before, but the fact that we started this season 4 years ago, whatever it was, and
in Frank Lampard's case,
yeah, and Lampard was bad at Everton, and then Potter was this sort of systems manager, comes in at Chelsea. Lampard's the only manager probably ever in the history of Premier League that will have lost to Nathan Jones. And now he's back at Chelsea and Potter's out. So, I mean, I don't think anyone can really figure out what's going to happen in the next few weeks. Who knows? You know, Glenn Hoddle will be back by April. I mean, Glenn Hoddle will be back by May.
Don, before we let you go, just a quick question from Matthew Reed, who says, what should Chelsea's realistic targets be if Lampard returns till the end of the season?
He's a stopgap. I mean, if they can qualify for European competition of some kind, then brilliant. And that's not outlandish. I mean, they could do that. It's such a congested division in terms of the race for the Europa League places. But to be honest, it feels more like let's just get to the end of the season and start the long-term planning process again.
So the target is, can he help with the passage of time passing?
Yeah.
As long as he doesn't stop time,
he will have his own targets. And in fairness to him, I mean, he will want to go out. He will want to go out in a better fashion than he did last time.
Right.
You know, I was at that defeat at Leicester when he lost his job last time around, and it was a fairly miserable period as for Chelsea supporters and fans, and he'll just want to go out with, you know, Stamford Bridge singing his name, I guess.
Nice. All right then, Dom. Brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date on all of that, and look forward to reading more about it on The Athletic. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.